Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Red Path. My name is Dara, and joining me today is Frasier, who is just come back triumphant from a fantastic tournament in Calgary, going 6-0. Dude, it's awesome to have you on the channel. It's awesome to talk about this amazing event. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's great to be here. Obviously, world leaders have a great community. So any chance to kind of interact with everybody and learn some things and share my thought processes, I appreciate. So thanks for inviting me on.
Awesome, man. So you went to this event. You were just telling me before we kicked it off. Basically, after what sounds like a little bit of a hiatus, maybe like
Yeah,
not playing so many games recently. Why don't you tell us all kind of what got you going to this event, what the lead up was, and how you were feeling going into this?
yeah, absolutely. So I took the world leaders to a small RTT in like the second week of January. And then apart from that, I've really had no other games of 10th except for two practice games literally the week before this tournament. I wasn't even planning on going to the tournament until I kind of found myself in the city around the timeline where it was going on. The points changes came, and I was kind of bored one night, and I opened up the Warhammer app, and I was kind of playing around with lists and points, going through data sheets, and I put together a 2,000 point list that I really liked that I thought would play exactly how I wanted to play. Um, and I thought world leaders were in a good enough spot where I could come to the event and be competitive. But to be completely honest, I was just using it as a way to like reconnect back with the community and the guys that I knew in the city. I didn't know that not many people were really going to take world leaders seriously when it registered for the event, which was pretty funny considering the outcome. But yeah, no, I tossed the list in the group chat, and a few guys were like, "Well, like go to the event," and I was like, "What event?" And then it was the Alberta Classic, which is taking place just in Calgary here, and I got a last minute transfer ticket, and then yeah, so that was that.
Yeah, it's definitely not what I would be expecting for chatting to someone who has literally just come off the back of a huge victory, like 6-0. I always have like a soft spot for people who go 6-0 because I'm like that feels so much harder than a 5-0, you know? Because it's like the last three games, like fully half of the games you play, they're going to be hard games.
Yeah,
So it's like it's a crazy achievement, man. So like, first of all, massive congrats from us here in the Red Path, and I'm sure there's gonna be loads of people down below who are super hype about this. And I think it's like a really like positive thing for people who are watching and maybe not able to necessarily get like crazy amounts of reps in or play the game really regularly and stuff to see that sometimes you can just show up and do really really well. So that's
yeah.
awesome. Would you say you were like generally quite a competitive player going into this? Like, what was your expectation for the event?
Yeah, yeah. So I've played. I started in like kind of COVID, and especially in the first couple of years of Warhammer, I was playing quite a lot. Me and my buddy Morgan, we were both really competitive. I played melee armies. He plays shooty armies. We basically spent all of COVID just playing each other and trying to like one up each other. And that led me into like big monster mash lists, and he led into the Ultramarines. But I've had melee armies like all the way through. I've won RTTs before. I've come like third at majors like Goonhammer Open, one team events. So like I've played at a lot of top tables. I just took like yeah like a big break from the game. I was super busy with school. Wasn't really that interested in like traveling to events and seeing what else because I had a lot going on for the sports and everything. And then yeah, just kind of hopped into it last minute. Nobody from the team was really expecting much, especially after somebody takes like a big break. And then as I was sending some of the ridiculous scores into the chat as it was happening, everybody was kind of like, "Oh my God!" like, like especially like yeah, like 2-0, 3-0. Like I some games I won like 100 to 13. Like it got like pretty ludicrous. I had one score below 96 all tournament, and I think that just kind of speaks to the world leaders, and especially if you understand like fundamental movement mechanics. I honestly had no idea what any of the other armies in 10th wanted to do to me. I knew which ones were considered competitive, but I didn't know any of their data sheets. I didn't know any of their rules. I was asking a lot of questions during the game, but you don't need to have like a comprehensive understanding of a lot of other things. You just need to know threat ranges, talk to your opponent before the game, communicate during the game, and build a list that leans into your play style and you understand what you want to get out of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that last point is something I love to hear. Something I've actually been chatting a lot about in Discord with the homies and stuff recently is like, people are kind of maybe sometimes fixating on like we'll say the meta list or what people consider is like the most competitive thing, but actually like leaning into your own personal playstyle is something that I really advocate for. And obviously now we have you here who, having done that, have won a massive event and secured a golden ticket. So you're going to be going to WCW this year to Atlanta, right?
Yeah,
And playing in the World Champs, which is awesome. I'm hoping to chase down a ticket myself. So should
yeah,
I
I might
manage to
see you
get
there.
that, yeah, I might see you there.
Yeah.
Yeah, which would be pretty awesome. But everyone wants to know watching this, what was the list? I want to know. I actually haven't seen it myself yet. I'm just on the hype
So,
train of seeing world leaders winning, but hit me with this one.
so there's a couple unique things about the list, but by and large, it is an 8 pound list. So Angron, Khorne, Invocatus. I took the World Eater's Master of Execution with the free heroic intervention enhancement, which I can get into how nasty that could get
Oh
afterwards.
man, you're after my own
Um,
heart. I love that
which,
enhancement
which
so
I
much.
which I don't really see a lot of people bringing it,
Yeah,
but when it comes up, it is a big
big.
deal.
Yeah.
Um, Unit of 10 jackals, unit of 10 berserkers, unit of 5 berserkers, um, rhino, and then 3x3 regular 8 bound, 2x3 exalted 8 bound. So just MSU 8 bound all throughout the list, and then just a unit of 2 spawn. So the unique things about that list is, first of all, MSU 8 bound instead of like the big exalted bricks. 85% of the time, giving away 320 points as a trading piece feels like um, it's never really a feel good moment. I find that having the two smaller squads, you have two bubbles with no fallback. You have two of the leader weapons. One of them started like up in strat reserves or like deep strike to come in for like ingress every single part of the tournament. But the 8 bounds job is not large anti tank, large like anti horde. Like it's just essentially for like regular 8 bound data sheets, but with like the no fallback aura. That's what I need them for. So having two chances of that with a second squad of Exalted 8 bound coming in at some point of the game to support the rest of the army with a no fallback aura um, was pretty huge. And then that way you can charge on, even if I wanted to use both of them, I'd have two of the paired. I could charge them both on the same unit. If I kill it, I can pile into another unit and I can kill that. But it's a whole army based around the auras from the 8 bound, like the rerolls to wound are massive. Um, Obviously, like the no fallback is massive. Having the Angron support with complete rerolls to hit is massive. But it's a list it's all basically min-size units because I use the Alpha Strike to kind of take the legs off armies. I'll go for it instead of going for like big blobs or kill units or stuff that can deal with me. I'll prioritize even screening junk units and units that can move fast, especially in my first few turns when I have the enhance like the blessings of movement. And then later in the game, I can deal with like the big heavy hitting blobs when I'm already in combat, and then I can pop stuff that I feel better about having, like lethal, sustained, or like the feel no pain or the fight on death. But basically, it's just I know this is kind of counterintuitive to what I was saying before about not knowing anything about any of the armies in the game, but I promise you, while I was at the tournament, after I finished my games early, I was doing my research, and you kind of figure out how to take the legs off the other army right off the start, even if they retain a lot of their killing power. And then later in the game, you can force a lot of the mixed lists into kind of like melee slogfest with you, and being quite literally the fastest army in the game, that turns into a huge point scoring differential, especially after they try to make up like the primary points to counter like the initial alpha strike. Um, world leaders do so well at scoring, as long as you're not putting yourself in like any like really bad positions or trying to get greedy with charges. The whole tournament, I didn't even roll for a single charge higher than 6 inches. And basically, the reason why I have so many 8 bound squads is because anytime I could see something important right off the rip for like an alpha strike, I would put two squads of 8 bound in exactly the same spot, essentially with exactly the same threat ranges on opponents. And I would roll the advance for the first one. If it wasn't a good advance, they were immediately just going back behind cover. I'm not risking the high charge. they're in a ruin and they're staged for the next turn. I know the threat ranges. I know the enemy can't get an angle on them with max movement. I know they're not going to get charged into. And the other one, if I really needed it, that's when I'd spend the CP. But if not, I'd roll for it. And usually it would be a 4, 5, or 6. And then that I'm more willing to play ball with. It's just a list that it mitigates the amount of CP you have to spend because you have so many units that kind of do the same things. And then sacrificing kind of like those lower cost trading pieces never feels like too big of an investment when you have 145.8 bound, 160.8 bound instead of like 320 points. And then Angron, obviously, I needed him in a lot of my matchups to do the heavy lifting because I didn't have that big brick. Um,
Yeah,
I
makes
like
sense.
Angron in my lists. He's not necessary, but if you didn't have Angron, you need a significant amount of like other like anti-tank present.
Yeah. Yeah, I get you. I
Yeah.
think it's like it really benefits from not having that exalted 8 band brick is like something that you kind of almost have to babysit in terms of like when you introduce it into the game, right? As it's often very hard to make that commitment decision with such a valuable unit, but as you rightfully say, having two MSU squads of them, you can spread out your aura of no fallback a little bit better. You can do some really interesting things with that. Like, I mean, functionally, the area that you can cover with two 3 man squads is so much bigger than a 6 man squad, right? So I think it's really cool. I'm a huge fan of that. I love just like the MSU build in general. I think it's really interesting. And I think you highlighted a lot of like really, really important things for just like not just how your list plays, but how world leaders should play in general, where it's kind of like cutting the legs off the opponent, reducing their scoring potential, not really caring that much about their hammer units because their hammer units generally don't want to do the scoring. So if you can get that accelerated scoring early in the game, and as you say, deal with them later, it's very powerful. But the one that I really want to hit on because I absolutely love this unit. Since the
My
balanced
favorite.
episode, I've been playing it so much as well. Um, Tell the people about Mo with Battle Lust because it's just the coolest thing in the game.
Um, you know what? Berserker Glaive general use is going to be useful into basically all the matchups you go into, but whenever Battle Lust Mo comes up, it is oppressive. When I was first rereading the enhancements, I kind of looked at it. It's our cheapest one, and I couldn't understand how basically like a 2 CP stratagem uh, was like free, especially for a melee list doing exactly what you want to do. Um, the best way to counter fights first is to charge something else and then pile into the unit because the activation is technically happening first on the pile in unit and the fight source wouldn't apply. But that doesn't exist when you can just heroically intervene. I can happily say that I think I used it once all tournament, but it had an effect in probably 4 of my games as a deterrent. I can more aggressively stage 8 bound in a position where uh, they can get where I want them to in the next turn, but they're at like a 7, 8 inch charge range for my opponent. But if you want to charge those 8 bound, guess who's like literally 4 inches behind them? A kind of like 11, 12 inch charge range. Mr. Mo with the 10 squad of Berserkers, usually in melee matchups. I'll put Khorne with the 10 in matchups that I need more volume. But lots of times people don't even roll for it. People don't even want any part of that combat because they know what's coming into them. And any experienced Warhammer player knows that the biggest no-no is losing stuff in your own turn. So any kind of mirror match, any kind of melee army that's going to come into you and try to do bad things to you, you can set up how you want to, whatever, scout forward, scout aggressively, and then like whatever you need to do at the beginning of the game. If you have that 10 squad behind with the Mo, it just protects everything. Like it's he does such a good job of just deterring the opponent. And like the biggest way, like the only other way to really deal with that fight's first unit then, like reliably, is to commit something smaller into one side of the squad and then put something important into the other side to try and like basically survive it. Uh, but it's such a nice thing to have. And the reason why I put it in the list is because it's a list that doesn't necessarily do one thing extremely well. It just gives good players that understand good movement, good pylons, good consolidates, that play like consistent, good movement games, as many tools as they can have into many matchups. I already have stuff that can kill lots of things. I don't really need the Mo to have an extra damage and an extra like attack. Like it's nice. It's nice. And of course, like it's gonna come up. Um, but having that heroic intervention potential is just something that the list didn't have before, that I wanted to have because I want as many tools in my toolbox as possible, just because I trust myself as a player, rather than to have something that like for generalist use that like the list could already do.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
yeah,
It's a beautiful tech piece. I mean, the way that you describe playing it is how I've also been doing it, and it's like the amount of times you actually roll that heroic against good players is very very little because most of the time they're so scared to charge you
yeah,
that you never get the opportunity to use it. But then you have that safety net because of how you have like the freedom to set up and stage and all that. Like we in the Discord, we're just saying he's like a bouncer. You know, he like stands next to the boys and he's like, if you want to come in, you can, but I'm gonna kick you right back out. And like
yeah,
you say,
exactly.
like the worst thing, as a player in 40k is like losing stuff in your own turn. And because of the way that it works with the heroic and stuff, it's like a cascading effect where, you lose stuff in your own turn, and then those two units are then free to act in your actual turn in the next one. So it's just crazy powerful. It's kind of like it's interesting to me that we're all like kind of collectively waking up to this enhancement now. Maybe it's because we've got the points for it or something. I don't know, but yeah, it feels great. So let's flip into the actual tournament, right?
Yeah,
So it was 3 games on 2 days, like 3 games each day, I assume.
yeah,
Cool. How did day one go? What did you play into? What was your run?
yeah. So day one was all on terrain layout four. For those people that like their context. My first game was into like Tyranids. The list, I can actually pull it up right here. The list was kind of like half hoardy, half slightly. I didn't really know what the list was trying to do. And like super nice opponent. But I don't think he really knew what the list was trying to do because it seemed kind of all over the place. But that one was priority targets, hidden supplies, and search and destroy. So I also had like the quarter deployment. The only thing that's notable about the list was it was assimilation swarm, which means that he gets basically like a fight first relic, and all the little stuff kind of wants to regenerate. Um, and right off the rip, basically, the biggest part of that game was he went first. He came forward with the Brood Lord, um, with the intention of like attacking 8 bound, like he did his pregame move, and then I pregame moved back, sat right beside my brick of 10 berserkers with the um, with conveniently the heroic intervention stratagem. And then he looked at it and he went, oh, and then a unit of 10 gene stealers and the broodlord sat and did literally nothing instead of deciding to charge in and get obliterated. And basically I just like it wasn't that long of a game. I double charged a lot of things into his initial swarm units just because his second wave was too close. And that again, having the min-size units allows me to do that. Um, and basically, like it just like everything, like a couple things piled in, everything else consolidated into combat. And his army just didn't have enough teeth to deal with like everything else that was going on. Uh, and yeah, the end score of that game was 100-30. Um, yep, that was pretty typical first round. They usually either go like that or it's just you just
Yeah, or
get
else
like
you get like the,
swept
the
and you're like,
matchup of death, right?
I'm
Yeah,
part of the fun bracket now.
yeah.
Um,
Time to go hang out with the homies. Yeah, it can
but
happen
yeah,
though, right? Where you get these situations of someone who maybe doesn't have the reps into world leaders or the familiarity, and being able to recognize, because it's like you say, you don't need to know the opponent's army, you just need to know, hey, they've put those two units close together so I can double pile in, or they're not respecting the fight first potential on this guy who can free heroic intervention, all that kind of stuff. It's just about picking out the basic kind of things. I suppose I say basic, they're not basic to somebody who's getting to grips with the army, but with enough practice you kind of get the hang of it. So yeah, strong first opener. Must have felt pretty good to kind of get in the saddle again and sort of feel it all working.
yeah, yeah. I played a couple games earlier that week. So coming into the tournament, I was feeling pretty good about the list, especially like as soon as I tried out the list for the first time, like I didn't change anything about it.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
for context, on the tournament a little bit, which I forgot to mention, there's a couple like Team Canada guys in here, like a lot of guys that are ranked in like top 50 like in the country, some like
the
are top
sharks.
100 like overall ice. So it's like
Yeah,
I came into the tournament, I've top tabled here before, but I've never won one of the Calgary tournaments. So there's definitely some really, really good like faction specialists. Grey Knights have a really good faction specialist who was at the tournament. There's a gentleman called Ozzy who was at the tournament, which he's just like a human computer. It is
Yeah.
ridiculous. But yeah, so I came into the tournament expecting to play like pretty high level Warhammer. So unfortunately, there are a couple matchups I ran into where I would have liked to have a little slower, nicer game with them because they were nice guys. But
Yeah, I get you.
that was the first one.
Nice.
The second one was against like a melee Necrons list. They brought the monolith and they were kind of trying to teleport everywhere on me. And that's the biggest thing is when you come across like a hypercrypt list or like a Grey Knights list. World leaders have the movement to dictate engagements, and our models are, I think we're point costed effectively, but our models are way too expensive to be losing things and losing tools without them doing anything. So I hate armies that can just pop up like 3 inches away, like blast you, um, and like just like deny all of your staging potential. Because that's when you
Terrain
start
doesn't
to run
matter
out
when
of
they teleport behind you, right?
that's when you start to run out of like models fast and like
Yeah,
measuring threat ranges and like being calculated. Like you can have perfect movement against some of those armies, and you just don't have enough units to screen as much as you want to.
absolutely.
So Hypercrypt worried me a little bit. Grey Knights worry me a little bit. I didn't actually end up with the Grey Knight matchup this tournament, but I'm sure it'll come up at some point, especially because they're pretty good right now. But anyway, so this game we were again like terrain four. Um, it was Scorched Earth, Chilling Rain, and then Dawn of War, so long edge deployment, which I liked because I knew regardless of where he put his monolith, he was going to be kind of in range of a first turn charge. And then turn one, this was probably the nastiest game of the tournament. Um, like the list has 5 things that can like just immediately be up in your grill like right in the first turn. Well, I say 5 because I start like one of the squad of 8 bounds like up in the sky. Um, like exalted 8 bound up in the sky. But it's just like it, some people just don't understand. Like you can explain the distances to them, but they don't understand like the alpha strike potential.
No,
Uh,
yeah, they
and
a lot of people kind of cap out at like 14 on the measuring tape.
yeah,
You know, they're like beyond that. I'm like, I don't understand anymore.
yeah, yeah, and like I
Yeah,
I love I love the late game score game, and I'll play that with anybody any day. But if you set up in a way that doesn't really respect what world leaders can do, it's a list that'll literally just bite your head off.
yeah.
I got into the monolith with Angron first turn,
Oh no.
uh, and then
Oh no.
everything else just like I got like my Mo into the big brick of wraiths, and then a squad of 8 bound to clear up like once the character was dead. He lost around 1100 points in the first turn, and then it was like a 35-minute game, and then I went and got food and sat and watched the rest of the tournament.
Had a real nice lunch break.
Uh, yeah, it
It
was like
happens.
normal.
It
Yeah,
happens.
it was like normally my head's hurting at this point, but I'm getting
Yeah.
a nice little break. And then my next 2 matchups were a little more annoying because they're kind of a notorious thorn for the world leaders. Death Guard,
Oh,
which
okay, cool. Yeah, that guard is a big thorn.
can be like, especially like the -1 weapon skill, really annoying games. And they were both really good players. One of them was kind of only getting started last year when I met him at like one of these tournaments. And I think he went either 5-1 and 4-2. So it's nice to see him doing well. His name's James, super nice guy. But we were playing on the ritual with Scrambler Fields and Sweeping Engagement, which is like the long diagonal deployment, which basically means that if he doesn't want me to get to something in the first turn, I'm not getting to it. Frankly, like even if there was nothing else on the board, I wouldn't have the range to get to it. So I knew that a lot of the stuff was going to be safe. He brought, he didn't bring a Morty list. I can just pull it up here. He brought one Rhino with the 10 Plague Marines with the Putrefier. No Foul Blight Spawn, so no fights first, which I enjoyed, obviously. Lord of Virulence, Typhus, Death, the Rhino, Cultists, 2 Predator Destructors, which eight
Super
bound do
popular for the
not
boys right
like,
now. Yeah,
which
yeah.
8 bound do not like.
Nope, not as
Exalted
Deckard
8 bound,
anyway.
exalted 8 bound are kind of like, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
But a big break of Death Shroud, a bloat drone, 2 crawlers, 40 poxwalkers, a squad of nurglings, then 2 knights.
40 poxwalkers is a lot of poxwalkers to get through. Yeah. And two
Yeah.
knights as well. Were they brigands or carnivores? Brigands, I
There
would
was
say.
one carnivore, one stalker actually.
Oh, the
No
stalker.
brigands.
Yeah,
No,
cool,
no,
sweet.
no, no brigand. He started one of those in the sky. And yeah, basically like he set up, I can't remember if he screened with the Nurglings or if he set them up in Deep Strike as well. But basically whenever something screens, usually Khorne is with the 5 if Mo's in the like in the Rhino, which he would have been in this case, because Death Guard just don't have the movement to get into me in the first turn.
Yeah,
So I'm not really that worried about it, and I'm not really also a fan of giving up one of my best late game pieces early by pre-gaming that big blob of 10 with the Mo into whatever he has set up for me.
yeah.
Again, I'm not in the. I know I've had a couple bad examples of that so far, but I'm not really interested in playing like the big game hunting right off the bat. What I want to do is I know it's Death Guard. I know it's slow moving. I know that he has big blobs, which I'm actually okay with leaving alive until the end of the game because they move all of 5 inches. And as long as you're very aware of your threat ranges, um, their biggest movement is like literally just charging around. So if you can stay out of charge range competently, those squads do nothing. So I want to take the legs off the list, and that includes looking at things in the first turn like the cultists. I want to clear up the poxwalkers just because they're really annoying. They clog up a lot of the board. And basically, what happened was I ended up going first. He moved the cultists, which were screening one of the predators early, and I managed to put in Angron and a squad of 8 bound into the poxwalkers, one squad of the poxwalkers, and a squad of 8 bound into the other squad. Um, I think Karn and the 5 um, went into the what are they called? The cultists, and then a squad of 8 bound went into the predator. So basically, it was just kind of like a like deal with this. I still have a couple. Like I have the squad of 8 bound in the sky, and all like my moving pieces are still involved. And he left a couple things kind of behind, which I knew I consolidated into afterwards. But because all of his scoring pieces were kind of like screening his important stuff, like I'm not going to be able to stay out of range of like the plague burst, so I'm not going to play like the range game. And frankly, like he doesn't have enough to run around the board and deal with everything, especially because like there was a drone over here, there was a knight over here. So if I can deal with those things, the rest of the army takes at least a turn to get to me. And by then I've set up spawn on a primary, invos on another primary, like in the center. If they get shot off, cool, they're gonna bleed on it, and now we have to play like the primary trading game. But again, basically like that first strike is just understanding, don't get greedy with it. Not everything needs to die. Everything will die more consistently for you later in the game once you have like the blessing roll active, where you can focus on things like killing, where you can get sustained, you can get lethal, and you can make yourself more survivable with like either like fight on death or like the feel no pain. But those first 2 turns are usually committed to, or the first turn's usually committed to movement, and then maybe defensively pop like the feel no pain or the fight on death if you really need it. But for the most part, I try to save all my attrition battles until later in the game when I have a lot more movement to be able to dictate everything. I just try to take the legs off the army early. Um, but yeah,
I mean, by the sounds of it, you left him with like functionally no scoring units after
basically,
your
yeah,
first turn push,
yeah.
which
He had
like
to,
is pretty rough for the Deckard, especially.
yeah, and like he still had his big brick of Marines, which I left alive. Like I wasn't really too worried about them. They're gonna come in like they're gonna later in the game. They were contested by like the Mo squad, obviously, but especially when they have access to like -1 damage as soon as they get like 2 CP. I'm very cognizant of Death Guard CP management, and I only really engage stuff that when they misspend CP on things, and I know that they don't have -1 damage to protect stuff, but the Death Guard punchback is pretty significant, and the
Yeah.
-1 weapon skill makes everything very swingy. So I don't usually go into big bricks of like 6 Death Shroud, for example. In this matchup, he dropped a Death Shroud at the back to deny my primary scoring. With the like he basically just like charged in and killed all the jackals that were on the objective. Cool. Those guys are now in my deployment zone. I don't want to see them or think about them for the rest of the game. And both him and Typhus were like wrapped up back there. And I
Yeah.
honestly, I just left them. I was like, they're there. They can nudge 5 inches as much as they want for like the rest of the game. They're not seeing anything. Um, so that's basically how that played out. And that one was 86-77.
Bit of a closer
Um,
game in that one.
it was a closer game.
Yeah.
It got pretty tight at the end. The next Death Guard game was pretty close as well. Um, this was all on terrain layout 3 for the second day. So it's the first game of
Okay,
the
cool.
second day. It was mission M, so purge the foe, chilling rain, and crucible of battle. So like again, short diagonal, which means that he can put away the stuff that he wants to. Um, and this list was a little different from the last list, especially because it had the presence of the big foul blight spawn brick,
That
which again,
is a bit much harder threat to kind of play around as world
it's
leaders.
it if you know what you're doing with it, it's not a huge deal. But my advice is for the most part, like avoid it in your turn until later on Angron doesn't really have a job, and then he can go into it because they're not going to chew through Angron. Uh, a lot of Death Guard stuff can't really deal with Angron. Um,
It is
so
probably like the biggest, I would say, like issue for DG is that like they don't necessarily have like a really good answer to Angron. I think
yeah,
outside of maybe Las Cannon Spawns and Predators or something like that.
yeah,
Otherwise they're really struggling to actually deal with that guy. So he's a huge
yeah.
asset for the DG matchup, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This fourth game was against a gentleman called Cass. He had like the Putrefier, Foul Blight Spawn, Mortarion, which was actually pretty cool because Mortarion met Angron on the center objective in the bottom of the fifth turn.
They are not the
and
same in
and
combat,
and,
let me tell you
and
that.
well, he needed to kill him, and he's like, it's like statistically can it happen? And I was like, technically on paper, it's possible.
Sure.
And then,
Yeah, sure.
spoiler alert, he did like zero wounds, and Angron just one turn
Dumpstered
freaking
him.
so good.
Man, that
And
guy
then
is
yeah,
sad in combat, but yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a vibe.
So the big plague marine brick in the Rhino cultists, two predators again, one squad of three terminators, two bloat drones, two plague burst crawlers, a squad of nurglings, and Rodigus. So there are
The
two
big
things.
man. Okay, that's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
cool. Yeah.
there are three things in the list that basically only Angron can deal with reliably, especially because I bring like the MSU like point scoring list, and that would be like this would be a list which I would have appreciated the six squad of eight bound, but it's proving that like it is still manageable without as long as you don't get like greedy with things.
Yeah.
So Angron is his work cut out for him this matchup basically. And again, I can't remember exactly how the game played out, um, but pretty quickly into the game, he set up like the Nurglings in the center objective, uh, and I think I went first for this one. Um, I'm I I think so. And then I moved forward. Invocatus killed off the Nurglings off the middle, and then he sat politely on the middle and waited to be shot, so he could bleed on it. And I dealt with one of the drones early, but all his tanks were too far back to get to. So I just kind of played the I'm in terrain, I'm in range of your primary. Whenever you want to come and like play the game, we can play the game. And naturally, Rodigus moved up uh, into Angron range. So I think Angron dealt with him in the second turn, but then was killed by grenades, psychic, and shooting from basically like all of his tanks. Um, Game played out. We went back and forth. I left his big blob of Marines and Morty completely alone because the resources I have cannot deal with those things reliably. I don't want to lose things into the fight first when I don't have to. Some people pop fight on death and then run into it. Like, what is the point? And then yeah, just all basically just trying to deal with the scoring units. And then later in the game, I think Angron actually ended up coming back on turn 3. And then by then it was just like he came in, killed all the Marines off the middle, uh, killed one of the drones, and then fell back onto an objective that I had to get because it was the secondary objective that he selected that I had to be on at the end of the turn.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's a new
Uh,
target. Yeah.
yeah, yep. And then met Morty in the middle. Um, and that was it. And obviously, there's a lot more to that matchup. But I wish I could tell everybody how to just immediately beat Death Guard. But to be honest, it just comes with player experience, and it's hard talking about a list that doesn't really have a job except to do whatever the player wants it to do.
Yeah,
Like you've
like I think it's a toolbox, right? You know,
yeah,
it's got loads and loads of nuanced tricks,
yeah,
which you know you look at this list. If you don't have the familiarity with it, you're like, I don't know how to play this list. It's really hard for, like, we'll say a newcomer to the faction to pick this up and get the mileage out of it. But it gives you so many options, and like it gives you the availability to play that range game. And when I say range game,
yeah,
I mean like the movement range game where
yeah,
you've got the speed, you've got the MSU, you can just run away from that big plague marine brick, and it doesn't matter, you know.
yeah.
Um, so I think it's brilliant. Like I mean, it's showing its strength in a matchup like this, where I would say maybe you know with the plague marine break with Mortarion and with Rodigus, it's slightly unfavored on paper, but then you know you show that like with good knowledge of how to manipulate the list and move it correctly, it can still come out on top. So I think it's like a real credit to you and very impressive.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. And like especially like with all like the min-size units, it's never really a commitment to send something in when you know something needs to die. Um, by and large in this list, and in world leaders in general, we only really are good at one phase. If you bring a Lord of Skulls, you can do like one model shooting or whatever you want.
And it will be
Um,
core.
but but you have enough time. You have enough time to ask your opponent, how far does this move? Measure max movement, measure angles, measure threat ranges. And I find lots of people are either being too aggressive or too passive with their staging of models. You need to be in range of objectives, and your models need to be playing the game, which means they need to be present in the game state. And there is always a sweet spot to put them in a place where it's like they're unseeable out of line of sight, even through max movement, or your opponent has to put themselves in a really poor position to be able to see them. And some people will commit to those, which is nice. But they're also like, they would have to make like an 11, 12, or like unchargeable charge to be able to get into you. And then you have the movement to be able to dictate and choose that engagement. And especially with the price of our models, um, that needs to be happening because you don't want to play the trading game where they get to go into you as well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the whole point of having like the big alpha strike is to be able to deal with things where like, oh, this army can kind of dictate the trading game. I want to see if I can deal with it early. Can you do this? And the next matchup's a good example of that. So I'll quickly wrap up the Death Guard. That one finished off 98-78. And it was yeah. So 20-point difference. But it was a good game, and obviously like min-size units, like very, very high scoring games. I think the whole tournament I might have missed out on something like 24 battle points total over six
Yeah, I think
games.
it's like one of the things that maybe we haven't really touched upon, but those min-size units allow you to score so much better because you
Yes.
don't have like six exalted that like have to be doing something very important in this
Yeah.
turn instead of doing an objective. It's like you got all these three mans running around being like, we're doing jobs, you know, it's all
Yeah.
good. So I
Yeah.
think that that does kind of, you know, highlight one of the massive strengths of this list is the fact that you have that capacity to score and not just score, but score like insanely highly as well. Like what'd you say? You dropped like 26 points across the whole event? Like that's crazy
I,
good,
I I
man.
think something like that. Yeah. My
Yeah.
my scores were 100, 100, 86, 98, 96, 99.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to
Yeah.
the strength of the MSU. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so
And
impressive.
it's like the only time I would really commit a lot to it is again when I could lean into the auras, when a new anger was in with the reroll to hits, when there was like when there was two or three units in, I wouldn't really drip feed units. When I committed, it was usually a wave of commitment, unless I was sure that that unit was going to be like defensively safe on the next turn.
Yeah,
Yeah. So the next game was against Tyranids. This was kind of a scary Tyranids list.
Tyranids are 5-0. That's kind of freaky enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was 4-0 at this time. Um,
Oh,
and
sorry.
this
Yeah,
was the
4-0. Yeah.
this was the fifth game. But basically, like I'd saw him like a week before. 'Cause he's a friend of mine. His name's Gordon Sidney, like great guy. Um, I saw him a week before, and he came up to my tables. He's like, "Oh, like you're back in the city. Like, what do you do?" And I was like, "Look at this list." Like I was so proud of like my world leaders list. I was like, "Look at this list on paper." I was like, "I just signed
Nice.
up for the tournament." Like, look, and he's like, "Oh, that's a cool list." And I was like, "So what do you do?" And he's like, "Well, I found this Tyranids list." And he talked to me about like the Tyranids list. I think he said it won like best overall at like three or four tournaments like this year so far. He came second to like the other big like Calgary tournament early in the year, and like he was just dumpstering on people at the
All
tournament.
right.
And
Nice.
he's like, I've found this list. So going into it, he actually played the World Leaders matchup right before me as well.
Oh
So
wow.
he
Okay.
played a Lord of Skulls, and he did pretty well. Obviously, he won. I'm not sure exactly what the score was, um, but I know it was like a pretty handily a win for him. Basically, it's a synaptic nexus, which immediately right off the bat they have access to fall back and shoot, which is
Cool.
kind of annoying.
Cool.
And basically, their whole thing is if I'm battle shocked, they have a stratagem where they get to roll either 6 or 8 dice, and every 3 up for the unit they choose is a mortal wound. So
Oh,
for me,
that's
that's
cool.
just kind of like, okay, well, that's annoying. He is the Death Leaper, Neuro Tyrant, 2 squads of Barbed Gaunts, which when they shoot me, they limit movement, uh, which is really annoying. Biovores, 2 Maleceptors, 3 Neurolictors, 2 Norn Emissaries, 3 squads of Ripper Swarms, and 12 Zoanthropes.
What
So,
the?
so, so
Is
I
it?
was
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is the Norn emissary the one who walks on an objective and it like becomes like OC like 20 or something crazy like that?
basically he could either walk onto an objective and become like super high OC, or they're like toughness 11 or 12. I don't know. God knows how many wounds. I think they're like 18 wounds, 4 up invul, or when they walk on the objective, they get a 5 up feel no pain.
That's it. Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
which I saw that and I was like, there's no way I want this guy to get onto any kind of objective. Because it was a scary list.
That's such a like bizarre list. It kind of feels like a weird like dark mirror of yours where it's like complete toolbox list in terms of like this has a lot of
Yeah,
options to do some crazy things.
yeah. But the thing is right off the bat, he popped the Neuro Tyrant's enhancement, which is some kind of like psychostatic disruption, which made my whole army take a battle shock test, like for my Alpha Strike, which was which was pretty annoying. Especially having the 2 Maleceptors in there, which give off an aura of -1 to hit. Uh, that was annoying. But we were on supply drop, chilling rain, and search and destroy. So quarter deployment again. And I looked at it and I was like, this is one where if I play the chill game, I'm just gonna get like psychic to death. Like the amount of output on this list, like it's crazy. Like just mortals coming out of everywhere. Psychic, like really, and I know like out of line of sight, like I could have played like the long staging game. I just wasn't really a fan of doing it. So aside from the Necrons, if there was a list that I wanted to just go at, um, this was it. So right off the bat, the first turn, I auto sixed Angron because he left one of the Norns right beside the other in a place where if Angron auto sixed, it was a 6 inch charge. Um, and then I charged up. So he like here's his quarter deployment. Behind here's his deployment zone. There's a building here. The 2 Norns are here. There's another building like further back. And on the side, here's the Barbed Gaunts inside of the Zoanthropes. And there's some Zoanthropes lining the side along here. Basically, I just got in a crap ton of like double charges. Over here, I charged into this like this front infantry squad with the intention of like consolidating into the Zoanthropes afterwards. Even though they had access to fall back and shoot, it was my all or nothing right off the bat, first play of the game. I just needed to get the Exalted Eightbound into combat as well, just to make sure that there was some degree of no fallback. Um,
Yeah, you need that
like like
there, right? You need
like
like a
present.
big leadership
Yeah,
check.
yeah. So the Exalted Eightbound got into combat with uh, one of the Neurolictors and the Norn, um, and then um, another squad of 8 bound managed to get like a. I basically lined up the 2 squads like right next to each other, over on this side of the board. One of them rolled a 6 on the advance. So right off the bat, I was like, okay, that one's the one going in. So he got in. He was able to get like a 4 inch charge into the Zoanthropes, which was really nice because this list doesn't actually have a whole ton of screening units. So I kind of got access to what I wanted to. Um, because any further back and he would have kind of taken himself out of the game more than he wanted to because this is a list that wants to run the show. And then my other squad just kind of like staged back. And then for some reason he put the Death Leaper like all the way over here somewhere, and I put Khorne over there dealing with that, with the squad of 5. Like he pre-gamed and he did whatever. Like kill the Death Leaper tried got like the fights first, didn't kill Khorne, and then Khorne just with his squad
Yeah,
ended that, and then he kind of chilled
it's
over
a
there on
funny
that
one.
objective. Um, Angron, I needed to pop the +1 to charge on because I'm not a player that likes taking risks.
I was
Even a
gonna
six,
say, yeah, when you said you line up a 6-inch charge, I was like, ooh, I feel like you're gonna want the +1 there, right?
even especially because I already spent my CP to get the auto six.
Yeah,
I knew I needed it to happen because I didn't want to touch the objective. Because as soon as it touched the objective, I don't know if I can kill it.
yeah, probably not
So I
realistically,
so I +1 to charge. I think he rolled like an 8 or something anyway. Whatever.
typical.
Whatever. He's in. It's just squad of 8 bounds in. If I didn't do it, he would have
Oh
rolled a
yeah,
5.
100%.
So
Yeah,
so so yeah, everything got into combat where I wanted to. Again, the whole tournament, I didn't roll a charge lower than 6. I don't like taking risks because that leaves my units to the open, and that's when you lose games, is because you're just losing. If it's a 3-inch charge and you roll 2 1s and you don't have any CP, it wasn't supposed to happen.
yeah,
But
you're meant to
but
lose there.
I just don't like putting myself in those situations.
Yeah, it's a
The
fair.
Norn lived, and
Okay,
all the exalted 8 bound went into him as well, and they lived. And then the Norn fought back the exalted 8 bound, and one of them lived on 1 wound.
dude.
And I was like, yes.
I've still got the
And then
fallback.
and then the Zoanthropes failed to fall back. The other squad of Zoanthropes was almost like completely dead. Um, and then the rest of the game, like he saw that and he was like, and Angron didn't die the entire game.
Dude.
He spent the entire game in combat. The Maliceptors couldn't clear him. The rest of the zones couldn't clear him. All the mortal, he was passing on his leadership. He was trying to, and I actually, that was a game where I feel like I needed to get like that heavy first punch, and I ended up winning that game 96-17. He
Jesus.
my game 5, yeah. He took fixed, so he was behind enemy lines and homers. So I knew he wanted to come to the middle. So guess what? You're not coming to the middle. Um, and he wanted to get in my deployment zone. So I had the squad of jackals. I had a rhino. Invocatus was sat in the middle, and my spawn didn't go up to this objective. The squad of 5 that I sent up with Khorne to deal with that objective, they were supposed to like screen my deployment zone because if we're playing the scoring game, I don't want you to score it off. He was going to
Yeah.
shoot spore mines in. He had ripper spawns. Everything was measured, and I couldn't leave an inch anywhere. And it like I had to keep those things back there, and the whole rest of my army committed. Next turn, the exalted 8 bound came in ingress, and like it was just like I remember there was a point where so it was a tournament where basically if you lose, you get 2 raffle tickets to be able to put into like the prize pool. And if you win, you get one. And I think it was in the middle of turn 2, and the TO came over and put the 3 tickets on the table. And Gordon just looks at me and he grabs the 2 tickets and he just puts them in his pocket in like turn 2. And I was like, yeah,
Dude.
that's
Oh.
fair enough. Um,
I mean, it's a big shutout though. But like, what a gamble, you know? Like,
yeah,
it was a high risk play with a high reward. But like, I think you really highlight it though. It's like, as long as you have those exalted in there, you can shut down the no fallback aura.
yeah.
Um, Once that pops off, you know you're pretty much safe and dry, right? It's
Yeah,
like
and
things are
and
gonna
and
be good now.
that's why I like the second squad of 3 was because guess what? It's still a 6-inch aura. The size of the aura doesn't really change. I know you have more bases, but it's just a second chance that whenever I decide to commit that second wave, there's another chance of the no fallback. And
Yeah,
most of the time, like it won't work on just like one unit, but when you have 3 or 4 units involved, when you've committed like 2 squads of 8 bound, Angrons, and Berserkers, and an Exalted, something's probably not going to be able to fall back, and then that is oppressive. It's
yeah,
like that's where it turns into like this is game. That's why I like this list so much is because it has the scoring, it has the min-size units, but those units are still there. Those models are still on the table. It doesn't matter how big they are. I can double commit, I can triple commit, I can do whatever I want. You have to respect the alpha strike, and it means you're deploying a lot further back than you usually need to be able to deal with everything and score as much as I can in the game. Um, and if I have to commit to the alpha, this list has teeth.
100%.
And that's what I love about it is I can use my movement and my pile-ins and like everything I need to, and it can just be everywhere.
Yeah,
That no fallback aura could literally be on everything in your army that's in combat because of like how many units that I brought with this list. And it just works. It works exactly how I wanted it to. Like, um, I know we'll probably talk about this afterwards, but as far as changing the list, like I can't think of anything that people could change. I would want to change for the list, but if people don't like the flavor, you could take off the enhancement and maybe add in another squad of like exalted instead of like the regular, or change around like the Khorne squad or
Don't
whatever.
take away
But
lust. It's
I
so
like it.
good, dude.
If you know how to play
So
with it,
good.
oh my
Yeah.
God. Like if you know like anybody you're playing, if you know how to play with it, you don't actually play with it because they just choose not to involve themselves with it at all. And it
Yeah.
keeps a lot of your stuff safe.
100%.
But yeah, so
So you finish up round five. Obviously, you're 5
yeah.
and 0. You're going into the final. How are you feeling like going into this game? You like pretty pumped, I'm guessing, at this point?
Well, at this point, on the other side of the bracket, there was Thousand Suns and CSM. So the Thousand Sun matchup, I don't like as much. It's doable, but it means I have to rely on him making mistakes.
Yeah,
And
it's a
normally, if
tough game. Yeah.
yeah, um, but because of my scores, I was like 40 or 50 battle points ahead of like the next total person in the tournament, and like world leaders had become like the boogeyman. So it was like yeah, like it's crazy what this list can do. And like even the gentleman, he's on my team, his name's Brandon. He's a great guy. Talking about like my list before, he's like, man, like he's like, I've like look at the list, like, so like he's like, I don't think this is gonna go too well. And I was like, I don't know, man. He's like, I was like, man, I just showed up to socialize. You're
Yeah.
good. But uh, but yeah. So the last one was against CSM list, um, Scorched Earth, Chilling Rain, and Dawn of War. So
Okay,
another long
cool.
edge. Um, Basically, his list was. I remember him specifically telling me this, that it was a list that people look at and they don't really know what he's trying to do with it. But apparently it works. Um, so most of the army is a Mark of Slanesh, unless I indicate otherwise. It's a Master Possession with Undivided, a Sorcerer in Terminator armor, uh, Warpsmith with a Mark of Zinch, three squads of Legionaries, a big brick of 10 Terminators, a big brick of 10 Possessed, um, two squads of Warp Talons. Sorry, the Possessed were also Undivided. A Hellbrute with Nurgle, two Venom Crawlers with Nurgle, and two squads of three Nurglings. Um,
It's an
so
interesting one.
yeah, so right off the bat, I get first turn, uh, and Angron and Invocatus go into basically he's got a line. So here's his deployment zone is above here. He's got a line of legionaries here. He's got like the Forge Fiend sat back here with the Warpsmith, the Big Breaker possessed here. The two squads of Nurglings are in the sky, which honestly, like, not a horrible call because he's not going to be able to screen that much on the board out.
Not in Dawn
I
of
could
War.
I can probably get into what I want to anyway. And it just gives me options for first turn scoring on secondaries, so not a bad call. And the two Venom Crawlers were all the way over here on the outside. So naturally, I hate movement. If there's anything you can take away from this, is I'm a person that hates when my opponent's armies can do things. I don't care if they can kill me. I just hate if they can score. So immediately, I'm not worried about where the Terminators are coming down as much. I'm not worried about the possessed, um, because I can just stay reasonably far away and know that I get to dictate when that engagement happens later when I have the blessings that I need to be able to reliably address those things. So what do I care about right away? I care about his legionary squads. I care about his warp talons, and I care about the venom crawlers. The Forge Fiend is obviously basically just like an anti-A bound weapon, but he's not really going to see anything unless I decide he does. Like if somebody only has there's not even that much to measure. If somebody only has like one shooting platform, just know your movement, know your angles, and like if you lose something to that, it's your own fault. Um, but uh, but uh, but
It's a fact, though. Yeah, it's a fact.
yeah, but basically, I move up. Angron, uh, I don't. I think I auto. Yeah, I think I auto sixed Angron. I don't think I saved a CP just to make sure he got in. And Invocatus also like pre-gamed himself, obviously. Two squads of eight bound went up this way. Two squads of regular. One squad of uh, Exalted, and one squad of regular. And I need to make sure. No, I didn't. I didn't auto six anger because I saved it for the +1 to wound against the Venom Crawler. I need to make sure that one of those is getting into combat. So I do the good old fashioned. I roll my first advance, and I see if it's high enough. If it's not, I don't re-roll it because I got another squad right next to it. It takes out that expenditure of CP. Having two squads with exactly the same purpose, with exactly the same target, it just like it saved probably like 6 or 7 CP over the tournament. Like it's so much nicer just having like that
Redundancy is a beautiful thing,
redundancy.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Either way, squad of 8 bound got up here. Squad of Exalted got up here. Both of them killed their respective Venom Crawlers, and Angron and Invocatus got into this line and cleared off all 15 Legionaries.
Word.
So oh, right off the bat,
What a vibe. Yeah.
and he looks at the board state and he's like, "Oh my God," because there's buildings here. My 8 bound are here, and the rest of his army is like here. Nothing can reach my 8 bound. If I get advance and charge next turn, I am killing his entire army
Oh,
in
that's
turn
so
2.
rough. The
Um,
yeah.
but but I didn't bring favored, so we naturally we didn't get advance and charge. But
Cool.
basically, he committed. Um, he didn't respect 8 bound enough. He committed each squad of Warp Talons out to 8 bound. Um, both of them just couldn't get
Didn't
the
do
job
it.
done,
Yeah.
and then both respective squads just immediately died back. Next turn, I didn't get advance and charge, unfortunately, or that would have been another quite a point differential game. But Khorne wills
Yeah.
the game out of it, so we'll give him a game. The Warpsmith Melta Pistol did 14 wounds to Angron.
Oh,
Um,
that's a
and
thing.
and usually I'll never reroll a save because I'll like again like I'm a probability person unless it's game changing. I'm not really ever gonna reroll a save, especially if it's a 50-50. I would rather save that for a benefit that I know is going to happen later in the game. I don't get emotionally invested in my models. I don't get emotionally invested in games. I'm not like, oh my God, like this would be a huge swing if I can make it happen. Like it's I don't take risks unless I need to stay like winning the game on the scoreboard. So the rest of the game, uh, he cleared off Invocatus and um, like this squad of 8 bound. Uh, they I think they towed onto one of the objectives and the Terminators came down in the like ingressed, and then they made it into them. Obviously cleared them off. So the Terminators are over on this side of the board, and the Possessive moved up, and then I moved in my squads of 8 bound. I didn't ingress this turn with the Exalted. I saved them for another turn. I moved in my squad of 8 bound, my big brick at 10, everything because there's nothing else really left on the board except for like the big bricks. I know I just preached not dealing with the big bricks, but I'd literally killed both Venom Crawlers, both Warp Talons, and the Nurglings was just in the sky doing Nurgling things, and all of the Legionaries.
I mean, at
So
that point, you
there's
might as well start tackling the bricks, right?
so there's literally unless I
Yeah.
want to sit there and do nothing, it's the bricks. So I get into it with, and this again speaks to probably why you should touch the bricks. He had 1 CP for a fight on death. And I got in the squad of 10 uh, Berserkers, the squad of 3 regular 8 bound. Uh, I don't think I committed another squad of 3 regular 8 bound yet. I think they were still just kind of hanging out. Um, and I think that was it into that brick. And they managed to kill. Before this happened, there was a single 8 bound left from the Warp Talons, and I moved him towards the Forge Fiend, potentially like purposefully in line of sight, and he overwatched him. So there goes the CP. There
Nice.
goes the
There's your
CP for
opening. Yeah.
the fight on. So that was nice. Um, and then I kill all of the possessed but 2. And then he needs to use like the desperate breakout the next turn to be able to fall back, and he rolls 2 1s. So
Nice. Great
we dealt with
moment.
that squad, and then basically the rest of the game, the Exalted came in with the other remaining 8 bound over here. The Hellbrute was dealt with. I finally got into that Warp Smith that was really good at killing Angron for some reason. And I got into the Forge Fiend. The Forge Fiend actually had a good round of shooting and picked up the entire squad of Berserkers and Mo in one round of shooting.
That is quite impressive.
So I,
Yeah.
it happened, and he was like, "Oh my God!" And I was like, "Nice,
I guess I don't
nice."
get
It
to use
it
Blood
it,
Surge.
it, it couldn't have been easy, could it?
Yeah.
That would have just sucked. Um, but uh, but yeah, and then after that, like it was the last objective, like because it was like scorched earth, I just burned his home objective. And then I was
Nice.
so far ahead, I wasn't gonna move out and deal with like the Terminator brick. Everything just kind of stayed behind on primaries, out of charge range, so he couldn't kill anything. He couldn't, because so many times I see people just like leave stuff in the middle of objectives, and somebody makes like a 10 or 11 inch charge to swing at the end of the game. Like you just got to be cognizant of game state and keep your brain engaged until like
Yeah,
the game's
it
over.
might look like a win, but like until it is a win, play as
Yeah.
if it's not, right? You know,
Yeah.
you got to be careful about that stuff.
Yep, yep. And then Nurglings came down to the back. But they can't control like an objective. So it didn't really worry me too much. And then apart from that, yeah, that was pretty much the game. And that one ended 99-66.
Strong.
And that was the tournament.
Hell yeah,
Yep.
dude. Hell yeah. How
Yep,
did
yep.
it feel to take that big W on kind of, I guess, like your re-entry into, like, we'll say, the competitive circuit, so to speak?
It felt pretty, like my whole team was like kind of like what the like one of the gentlemen, like the group chat, Alex, he was literally like for like a couple days afterwards, he's like, I'm still just like tickled that you just like showed up to socialize. And like I can't remember the exact wording he used, but basically just like took the entire event like nonchalantly without much preparation for it. Like again, like I
Yeah.
didn't have a really a great idea of what any of the armies were doing in 10th. I think there were a couple matchups that I don't want to say I dodged, but there definitely would have been. I had a couple games which weren't really that challenging for my list to deal with, which could have been replaced with like obviously harder opponents. But all my opponents were great, and obviously like the closer games, like all of them played like really well. Even the Tyranids game, like that could have gone very south very quickly. Uh,
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, I was pretty happy with how the list played. Again, there's not a whole lot I would change about it. Uh, the
Yeah,
next
you
event
seem
I'm
to
heading.
be like not really well, I mean, obviously, why would you be like, "Oh yeah, I would change the list," right? Cuz it seems to function perfectly for how you play
Well,
the game.
I'm always looking for the, but like point for point, I don't think there's any way I can give myself any more tools without just giving myself more of what I already have and taking away something that I would have had before.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so like it doesn't have to be everybody's play style. Like Mauler Fiends are cool. Mauler Fiends are cheap for what they do, but they can't stage in terrain. They have to take like the long walk around, and they're just less threatening, like movement and point scoring wise. Again, like everybody thinks world leaders hit like a truck, and like ever like this list has the capacity to do that. But like as far as like late game scoring goes, this is honestly probably one of the best armies in the game for doing it. And because it can do both of those things, um, especially in tournaments, like everybody thinks world leaders are in a bad spot right now because we have a 48% win rate. But if you build a list and you know what you're doing with it, you can very quickly become like the oppressive person to beat.
Oh,
Um,
100%. Yeah. I mean, like I
like
kind of talk about it in terms of like, you know, people look at the overall win rate and they're like, oh, 48% world leaders are trash or whatever. And then there's like no respect for them in the tournament. But then it's like you get the, we'll say, higher skill players who know what they're doing, know how to manipulate the movement phase. Um, and I mean, we had like what, like seven top 10 finishes, two tournament wins in just this past weekend, yourself
it
included.
was good.
Yeah,
We took
it's
off.
like I don't know, man. Something tells me that maybe in the hands of a good player, world leader's pretty hot.
Yeah,
And I think you kind of like exemplify that. And it's really like it's not so much about like knowing like, oh, I can kill this thing or blah blah blah. If I can like destroy these debt bricks with my debt bricks or whatever. It's like it's dominating that movement phase and
yeah,
knowing how to manipulate it. Like you kept mentioning measuring threat ranges from opponents, and I'm like, that's
yeah.
exactly what you should be doing. I think
You
people who
have
are
the
like
time,
watching, yeah, for sure.
especially as world leaders, like you don't have a whole ton of units, you don't have a whole ton of shooting. Measure threat ranges, measure angles, see what your opponent can see. Learning not to lose your stuff in your turn is honestly like the biggest thing. Like especially if you're just picking up like world leaders, and you're nervous to go to tournaments, go to tournaments, go to tournaments, make mistakes, go to RTTs because if you make a mistake, guess what? you get to not make it like an hour later, and then it becomes like integrated and like part of the way you play.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's all movement. Like you have the time to measure literally every single unit. We're not a horde army right now. I mean, you could be if you take I don't know how many shackles, but at the end of the day,
Yeah.
like especially like this style list, everything was calculated, and unless they're teleporting everywhere, nothing could see anything unless I wanted it to, and that unit's already done its job and scored.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's like you really make an excellent point when it's like just take the time to do the measurements because as you say you've got that time, right? You know, theoretically if you spend maybe like significant portion of your time per turn in the movement phase, everything else will go incredibly quickly. So like you don't need to stress about it, right? Like it's not hard to like speed through combat. You just need to roll the dice and just hand your opponent dice and just say like, all right, cool, whatever. You don't need to think about it. You've already done the thinking in the movement phase. I'm a huge fan of it. Like I just think a lot of what you're saying like resonates with me. You know, I'm like, yeah, that's like how people should be playing, and I think it's great for like people who are maybe newer to the faction or looking to improve, and want to hear from like a obviously a winning player. That these are like what you should be doing. These are the things you need to be implementing in your game plan. And as you say, go to events, go to RTTs, get the reps in, make the mistakes so that you learn from them. Obviously, you can like listen to us chat about it. The best way to learn with world leaders, get on the table and start making mistakes so that you don't make them in the future.
yeah.
But before we close this one out, man, is there anyone you want to shout out? Any particular like clubs or anything like that, or tell us what the future holds for your world leader adventures?
Yeah. So basically, just Prairie Fire Wargaming is the team that I'm a part of. We're up in Western Canada. We'll be kind of traveling all over the place over the next little bit. Obviously, we're going to try and get a few more of us qualified for Worlds. There's a tournament I'm going to coming up in July, I believe it's July 20th, in Saskatchewan, which is just one province over, and that's the big Saskatchewan Open. There's a golden ticket available. So if you want to come and play my world leaders there, you're more than welcome to come. But either way, it's a great time. By and large, I said this in one of my other interviews this morning, but I just appreciate like the world leaders community in general. Like I've been part of a lot of factions before. And more than anything, I like the communication on like Discord and Instagram and Facebook and everything. And like even like waking up like the morning after the tournament, I had like 40 or 50 message requests of people just like asking me about the list, like what I brought because they didn't have like BCP or like how I played it or what they should do. And like I will always answer all that stuff just because like the community is so like it feels nice. I don't know if it's because of our like lower win rate, but
Yeah.
especially when you win an event, everybody's kind of
It's super
like
wholesome,
like
dude. Though,
yeah,
like it's like I've always found it with world leaders. It doesn't really feel like any of the other faction communities. You know, people are like even the best players are like so willing to just like hang out and chat with other players and like make everyone get better. And I just feel like everyone's like pretty open to new ideas and innovation as well. Obviously seeing yourself like come out with something pretty spicy and different is amazing for that too. But yeah,
debatably different. It's still a lot of 8 pounds.
yeah, right. But it's
That's
like it's the MSU bound, right? And
we
I
have a
think
small
it's
codex. What am I supposed to
there's only so
do?
much room
Yeah,
for innovation. The real innovation is battle lust. People need to be on that drug. It's so
I
good.
I like it a lot.
Yeah,
Honestly, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Unless you're bringing all um like all master of execution with berserkers, if you go into a tournament with like only world leaders, this list will pick everybody up. Battle
100%.
Lust, MSU, it is dangerous. Um, First things first, learn your movement, learn your ranges, learn your pylons, learn your consolidates, read the rules, practice it. But after that, if you can learn how to use like Battle Lust and that intervention properly, oh my God, it is such a defense for your army. And it allows you to stage just that little bit more aggressively, safely, which allows you to reach some of those deeper threats, those tanks that are hitting you from like behind the lines in the next turn. And it's so reliable. Berserker Glaive is cool, but there's so much else in the list that can do basically the same thing as it. That's like I love the toolbox.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so so good. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. You know, always great to close out on a battle list. And
Yeah.
once again, obviously, dude, like massive congrats. It's a huge win. Great to see world leaders taking another massive trophy. And Yeah, good luck with the WCW. But for everyone else watching, I think this has been a super informative video if you want to get better at the game. So maybe watch it back, take down some notes, bring those notes to the table, and work on getting your own golden ticket for the guys with the nails. So for now, folks, you've been watching The Red Path. If you want to support us, check all the links down below. You know where to find us. Come hang out in our Discord. Everyone's always chatting. And until the next one, folks, stay healthy, stay safe, and kill Maidenbard.